Here's something surprising. In one study, just drinking more water in the morning lowered fasting blood sugar within 6 weeks without any changes to diet or exercise. That's how powerful your first morning choices can be. Now imagine pairing that glass of water with 2 more simple, science-backed habits. Today, you'll learn 3 small steps that set you up for steadier energy and fewer spikes all day long. But how can a simple glass of water in the morning affect your blood sugar before you've even had breakfast? It may sound too minor to matter, but it ties back to what happens overnight. While you sleep, you lose water through breathing and sweating. By morning, most people wake up mildly dehydrated, and that lack of fluid can influence how the body manages glucose during the first few hours of the day. One way dehydration shows up inside the body is through a hormone marker called copeptin. Copeptin is a stable blood marker that rises when water intake is low, and higher copeptin levels have been linked to both higher fasting glucose and greater risk of developing diabetes. In practical terms, it means the body perceives dehydration as a stress signal. Research shows that when vasopressin, the hormone copeptin tracks, goes up, it can stimulate glucose production in the liver and make it harder to keep fasting levels in range. In short, low hydration is linked with higher fasting glucose and a higher long-term risk of glucose problems. Think about what this means day to day. Skipping water in the morning won't cause an immediate dramatic change, but over time it can shift your fasting numbers upward bit by bit. That small rise at the start of the day can ripple forward, pushing glucose slightly higher after meals and applying more strain on your system over the long run. Even mild dehydration repeated daily can tilt the odds against stable glucose management. Large population studies support this. In a French cohort study, people who consistently drank more plain water had lower risk of type 2 diabetes compared to those drinking less. The benefit wasn't simply about quenching thirst, it reflected better insulin sensitivity over time. Larger intervention studies have also tested this directly. In people with low habitual water intake, adding about 1 to 1.5 liters of water per day for several weeks improved fasting glucose and related markers. A practical place to begin is straightforward. Drink 1 8-ounce glass, about 250 milliliters, as soon as you wake. It's a small step, but it sets the tone for how your metabolism handles glucose early in the day. If you already drink very little water, building toward a higher daily intake can make a measurable difference. But one important caution: if you have heart failure, kidney disease, or take medications that affect fluid balance, check with your healthcare provider before increasing fluids to stay safe. You can think of this morning glass as setting a baseline, much like establishing the first program on a thermostat. Once that foundation is in place, other systems in the body respond more smoothly, and interestingly, the very next influence on that baseline has nothing to do with what you pour into a glass. Instead, it starts with how you manage your first breaths of the morning. Mindful breathing before coffee may sound like a small step, but it has a measurable impact on your body's early morning glucose response. When stress and cortisol levels naturally rise after waking, they send a signal to the liver to release extra glucose. If you add caffeine at the same time, the effect can intensify, pushing your blood sugar higher than expected. Controlled breathing helps calm that stress response, and in doing so, it can blunt the amount of glucose your liver releases. This isn't about dramatic overnight changes. Short breath work or mindfulness practices have been shown in multiple studies to reduce the morning stress response. Over weeks to months, people who practiced daily mindful breathing saw lower fasting glucose or modest improvements in HbA1c. The key is consistency, building a routine that takes just minutes but helps regulate the signals that drive morning rises. To see how this works in practice, take the example of someone trying box breathing. They inhale for 4 counts, hold for 4, exhale for 4, and hold again. Just 2 or 3 cycles produce small but clear effects. A slower heart rate, a reduction in tension, and less intensity in that cortisol surge. By the time they move on with their morning, the body is better prepared to keep glucose steady rather than exaggerating the early spike. Slow diaphragmatic breathing, where you expand the belly as you inhale, is another simple option. The practical protocol is straightforward. Set aside 2 to 5 minutes for calm, intentional breathing before your first sip of coffee. Think of it as a short experiment you can try tomorrow. You don't need a retreat or any special tools. Even sitting on the edge of your bed and focusing on your breath is enough to trigger a quieter stress response. Studies confirm that short sessions like this can lower cortisol and activate the body's relaxation pathways. And the next influence on your morning numbers comes from a decision even more routine than coffee: the very first meal you choose to put on your plate. What you eat first in the morning shapes how your body manages glucose for the rest of the day. A savory, protein-rich breakfast is one of the most effective ways to create steadier blood sugar, not just after breakfast, but also at later meals. Breakfast isn't only about energy in the moment, it helps set your body's baseline response to food hours afterward. This is why the choice between something sweet and refined or something protein-forward can still show up in your readings well into the evening. A sweet, carbohydrate-heavy start, like cereal, pastries, or fruit juice, causes a quick rise in glucose followed by a strong insulin release. Numbers might look better after that initial dip, but the cycle leaves the body more sensitive to swings at the next meal. This pattern often shows up as stronger cravings mid-morning and a sharper rise when you eat lunch or dinner. In contrast, choosing a savory, protein-focused breakfast changes the picture. Research shows it leads to lower morning spikes and reduces the urge for early snacking. Beyond that, several mechanisms explain why the benefit stretches into later hours. Protein slows how quickly glucose enters the bloodstream. Protein, especially from sources like whey, stimulates incretin hormones such as GLP-1 and GIP, which strengthen the body's insulin response. Breakfast choices influence free fatty acid levels, which in turn affect insulin sensitivity for the rest of the day. This combination of effects creates a smoother, steadier glucose curve instead of the spike and drop pattern linked to sugary meals. People who consistently adopt this pattern often describe more even energy and fewer urges to graze through the day. Studies also point to an important nuance. If you skip lunch, the protective effect of a protein-rich breakfast on your dinner response becomes weaker. In other words, consistency across meals matters. Either keep lunch modest or make sure it's well-timed to maintain the benefits set up by your morning. A practical way to apply this is by replacing a refined breakfast with something protein-forward. Swap a sugary cereal or pastry for a savory choice such as eggs, Greek yogurt with vegetables, tofu, or even a small whey-based shake. These simple changes have been shown in research to blunt that morning glucose rise and keep levels steadier through the day. One note of caution: if you have kidney disease or take medications that affect protein handling, check with your healthcare provider before making a large increase in protein intake. For most people, though, these swaps are safe and effective. These three habits make a big difference, but what you drink in the morning can make or break those results. In fact, a few specific morning drinks have been shown to stabilize blood sugar for hours after breakfast. So before you grab your usual coffee or juice, check out our next video. You'll be surprised by which ones help the most. Tap the video on screen now.